Hello, learners, and welcome to the lecture in this NPTEL course on 20th century poetry. We have been discussing the poetry of Langston Hughes. For the past 5 lectures, I have provided a biographical and cultural introduction to this poet, and we have undertaken a close and meticulous reading and study of a few of the poet's famous individual poems. We will conclude our discussion of Langston Hughes in this lecture, and we will focus on a genre of poems which I have introduced in the previous lecture, and which is the category of poems called the lynch or lynching poems. I have provided a brief historical introduction to lynchings as a historical event. What were these events? What was the place and importance of these events in the history of 20th century United States? And in particular, what role they play in the formation of the consciousness and the identity of the African American community. I have also mentioned how the lynch poem became a category of its own, with several famous poems becoming part of this canon. And I have mentioned how Langston Hughes's particular combination of the blues song and the elegy places Hughes at a particular advantage. This is advantageous because Hughes is able to combine the power of these two very different forms, one with its roots in Black vernacular and African American popular culture, the blues song, the other with its roots in a much more classical Western literary history, that is the elegy. By combining these two forms, Hughes is able to write poems that enable a particularly powerful form of collective grieving. This is where we had stopped, and the lynch poem allows us to witness, in some ways, the culmination, the height of the poet at the height of his powers. What is this power? To produce an intellectual and emotional bubble in which whoever is reading the poem can undertake a powerful act of collective grieving. Collective grieving is unique and important and very, very particular to the African American community. So it is a combination of both literary history, cultural form, and the experience of people, experience of a community at a certain point in the history of the United States in the 20th century. All these things come together to enable Hughes's poems to have the kind of power that they in fact have. So this is the second lynch poem by Hughes that we will study, and this is called Silhouette. This is how it goes. Southern gentle lady, do not swoon. They've just hung a black man in the dark of the moon. They've hung a black man to a roadside tree in the dark of the moon for the world to see how Dixie protects its white womanhood. Southern gentle lady, be good, be good. This is how the poem ends. So we can tell from the very first line of the first stanza, that these words, the words that comprise this poem, are addressed to a particular person, a particular type of person. The person is not identified by name, but certain sociological aspects, certain characteristics, certain typological features of this person are provided to us. Southern gentle lady. Now, race is not identified, but the words southern and gentle combine to let us know that it is a white person. So the poem is addressed to a white woman, and the advice that the poet or speaker gives to this white woman is that she should not swoon, right? Why might she be swooning, or why might the poet feel the necessity to give this sort of advice? It's because we learn, again from the poet's own words, that they have just hung a black man in the dark of the moon, right? So by they, the poet creates a group of people uh, without providing any identifying features. The word they, a nameless collective, creates the image of an anonymous, indifferent mob. The word mob is used to describe a large gathering of people who end up causing violence. They end up producing damage, causing harm and violence. The anonymity and the violence of this group go hand in hand. They almost shape each other reciprocally, meaning, because there is a mob, individual agency is difficult to attribute, which is to say, because there is a group of people working together, no one person individually can be called out to blame. If this group working together ends up producing harm, causing violence, like maybe killing a person, then it is difficult for the law and order of the area or the land to provide justice, because it is difficult to identify, track down, and persecute every person who was part of that group who collectively caused that violence, that harm. So, anonymity and violence go hand in hand. And the word they, uh, which is simply referring to third person plural, right? This word creates that combination of anonymity and violence. They have just hung a black man in the dark of the moon. So, in this first stanza, only a few facts are presented. There is a black man, there is a nameless mob, not identified, simply identified through the consequence of its actions, the violence of its action, the suffering that this violence produces. There is a they, there is a black man, and there is a southern gentle lady. The act of violence has taken place, the black man has been hung, and as a person who witnesses the results, the consequences, the manifestation of this violence, the white southern lady is swooning. She's about to faint. It's a horrific sight, the consequence of this violence, and she's about to faint. The poet is comforting this person, trying to give some context to what is happening. Actually, we're not sure at this point if the poet will provide context. I have read the poem, so I know that the poet will provide context. But at this point, the poet is simply giving advice to this white lady who is witnessing this manifestation of violence. And the poet's advice is, do not swoon. Maybe the next stanza will give some reasons why she should not swoon. The poet begins by repeating the facts and adding a little more. They've hung a black man to a roadside tree in the dark of the moon for the world to see. So the rhyme scheme is extended. Moon and swoon had rhymed earlier. Moon is repeated. And the word tree and sea are then. A roadside tree. A road is where a lot of people come and go. A road is a common public area. A road is where people pass by frequently. So, by hanging this person on a tree that is beside a road, the goal is to ensure that the maximum or a maximum number of people witness this hanging, this violence. Again, in the dark of the moon. The dark of the moon, while the act of violence is taking place, there must be less chances of or less visibility to ensure less chances of anyone witnessing the act or reporting the act, and thereby attracting law enforcement. So This is the scenario, and more facts are provided. And then the poet gives some justification. What kind of justification is it? What is the tone in which the justification is provided? That is what we will see. The word tree rhymes with sea. So, in order to demonstrate something, this black man was hung by or to a roadside tree. What was it that these people wanted to demonstrate? They wanted to demonstrate, they wanted the world to see how Dixie protects its white womanhood. Dixie, I have glossed this word in the previous lecture in the context of the southern United States or states in the southern part of the US. Dixie refers to a somewhat nationalist consciousness. The idea that the ways of the South are better. Right? It is an affectionate way of referring to the American South. It is a way of justifying and glorifying and celebrating the traditions that were followed in the American South. One of these traditions was that of lynching. And here, the poet is being sarcastic. The poet is being ironic. The poet is saying that these mobs of anonymous, nameless, violent mobs, they hung usually black people, but in this case, they hung this black man to a tree, and they hung him by a tree that was beside a commonplace road because they wanted the world to see that the South, the American South, was actually a safe place. It was safe for women. What kind of women? White women. Because the South wanted to protect its white women, it needed to do, or it needed to inflict these kinds of violence. So this is obviously the poet does not believe in this logic. The poet is presenting a logic that was provided by several other people in the time that this poem was written. So a common narrative that was propagated in the early part of the 20th century was that black men had a depraved and somewhat animalistic desire, a sexual desire for white women. And they had animalistic or naturalistic urge to sexually assault white women. Therefore, there were a lot of cases, legal cases, of sexual violence or rape or sexual harassment that were labeled against black men. And these men were frequently tried in courts, but more frequently than legal processes, they were simply lynched by groups of roving, violent white men. One of these groups was the Ku Klux Klan, which was an infamous Southern group that enforced white supremacy. So this was an ideology of the time. The idea that white women are under threat of sexual assault from black men. This was a narrative. It was not proven by any scientific or statistical survey, so it was completely an ideology. The ideology of white supremacy. This narrative was designed in order to justify the punishment and exploitation of the African American community in general through the imprisonment and killings of black men in particular. So the poet is giving an ironic justification. The poet is saying, for some people, this was the justification for why a black man might be hung by a roadside tree. Of course, the poet does not believe in it, but the poet expects the white woman to maybe understand something of what is going on in the world around her. And then the poet says, Southern gentle lady, be good, be good. The last words, be good, in a way they are assuring her, they are reassuring her, they are saying, you need not worry. In fact, you should feel confident, you should feel safe, because the violence that you see was enacted for your safety. This was the logic that was given by several white supremacists of the time. So, on the surface of it, or in theory, this white woman who was beginning to faint by looking at this black man hanging from a tree, she should feel safe. But the poet also implies that far from feeling safe, she must be more worried. She should maybe not swoon, but she should become very cautious of what kind of a world she's living in. Why is that? Because this ideology, which has victimized black men for sexually assaulting, supposedly sexually assaulting white women, also infantilizes and patronizes its white women. Why so? Because it assumes that white women are susceptible, naive, are gullible, they will be misled, they do not have agency, they don't have freedom, they must be protected. And how can they be protected? They can only be protected if groups of roving and violent white men, like the Ku Klux Klan, go about the rural South catching and lynching black men. So at some point, this ideology, which claims to protect white women, will actually become harmful, will create a space that is in fact unsafe, although claiming to be safe for white women themselves. So this is how this poem ends. It's a short poem, but it's a powerful indictment of the ideology that governed the racist South. It is also a very interesting formal experiment, because Hughes is changing the perspective. In the previous poem, the previous Lynch poem that we discussed, A Song for a Dark Girl, it was written from the perspective of a black woman whose lover was hung from a tree, who was lynched. This time, Hughes has taken a different perspective, that of a white woman who is probably not related in that intimate way to the victim of lynching, but who is deeply connected, or because it was the white woman whose safety was cited, and it was the white woman in whose name these lynchings were often conducted. So a shift in the perspective, a formal experimentation, but connected to and in service of the same kind of critical thinking, and ideological expose that Hughes has been undertaking in his Lynch poems. Right. Let us move on now to another poem, this one written from the perspective of a black man, not one who is lynched, but who thinks about, reads about, hears, and reflects on an incident of lynching. This is titled Blue Bayou. It was published in Black Opals in 1927. This is how the poem goes. I went walking by the Blue Bayou, and I saw the sun go down. I thought about old Greeley, and I thought about Lou, and I thought the sun go down. White man makes me work all day, and I works damn hard for damn little pay. Then white man takes my woman away, I'll kill old Greeley. And the Blue Bayou turns red as fire, put the nigger on a rope and pull him higher. And I saw the sun go down, put the nigger on a rope and pull him higher. The Blue Bayou is a pool of fire, and I saw the sun go down, down, down. Lord, I saw the sun go down. So this is about a man who has a job, who is a working class black man, and who's reflecting on violence that he's seen around him. He's reflecting on both the cause, that is the source, as well as the victim and the object of that violence. He is reflecting on old Greeley, who's his employer, who's wealthy, who owns the business, and who's not very kind, who's probably deeply racist, and exploits his black employees. That is Old Greeley. And he's thinking about Lou, who's uh, a victim of a lynching, and reflecting on the news that's coming to him from all over the country. He reflects on what is going on. And the important thing, the key refrain that is repeated throughout this poem is, and I saw the sun go down. The word de is used in place of the the, which shows that Hughes again is ventriloquizing. He is speaking from the perspective of a working class black man who's using some of the language and who's taking liberties with standard or Queen's English. And this is what Hughes is able to get in terms of insights by inhabiting this perspective and this voice. Now, the sun goes down, so this is a particularly uh, important time of the day as the sun goes down. Now, what happens when the sun goes down? This is a very important moment that several writers and poets reflect on. Uh, the setting sun presents both a visual and an emotional moment of recollection. Visually, it's a very stunning moment because the colors in the sky change. It is the twilight zone, it is between daylight and nighttime. Before the light disappears, it changes color. There's an orange or golden glow to everything. So visually, it is quite stunning. The change in the visual aspects of the sky trigger or invite a change in the emotional makeup of the people. Watching the sun go down, individuals reflect on the passage of time. They reflect on what the day has been and how the next day will progress. They reflect on what they have achieved, what they have missed, and how they can compensate or continue, compensate for what they've not accomplished or continue what they have accomplished the next day when the sun rises. So, this is a time for the speaker of this poem to reflect on what his life has been. And he reflects on the experience of suffering, of exploitation, and of being unfree. The source of his lack of freedom is that his employer is white and extracts a great deal of labor from him without adequate compensation. That is one. Further, his employer or white supremacists generally also exploits his women, that is his wife or girlfriend. So this is another instance of how racism worked. The sexual exploitation or harassment of black women by white men. This is something that this speaker is reflecting on, and his reflections take on an increasing anger, right? As the blue Bayou turns red as fire. What is blue Bayou? Blue Bayou is a water body. A bayou is a water body that's like a bay but much shorter. And given the context of Hughes's travels, we may assume that the blue bayou in this poem refers to the water body on the coast of Mississippi or the states of Alabama. Alabama or Mississippi, maybe the Gulf of Mexico, one of these water bodies. So he reflects on a common refrain that these white supremacist groups might have been speaking while he watches the color of the sky change. He realizes that these white supremacists must be screaming, "Put the nigger on a rope and pull him higher." And this is what the poem ends with these two stanzas repeating the same thing. There are two movements that the poem juxtaposes. On one hand, there is the movement of a black body, that is, the black man who is hung and who is lynched, being hung on a tree, being hung by a rope, and the rope being pulled lower and lower, so that, like a pulley, the body of this man rises higher and higher. That is the first movement. The second movement is that of the sun going down. The sun going down, as I've explained, is an occasion for the speaker to reflect on what his life has been and what it might be going forward. And the poem ends with the words, "Lord, I saw the sun go down." The rising sun, as I mentioned several times earlier, is a very stock image used in the elegy. The image of the sun rising on the morning after the poet or the speaker has been grieving consoles the speaker, because when the speaker sees the sun rise, the speaker is convinced that the person whose loss he was mourning, that person is not lost in oblivion, but is in fact now a part of nature. Right? So just like the sun rises every day, so nature renews itself. So the death of a loved person, which was earlier seen as a reduction or a subtraction from the total goodness of life, with the sight of the rising sun, this loss begins to be reconfigured as a renewal. So just like nature renews itself, so death and life are also a part of human life. So this perspective consoles the speaker, because the speaker is convinced that just like the sun rises and gives life to all nature, so this person who was alive yesterday but is dead now is also a part of that nature. So this consoles the speaker, and in the traditional elegy, the rising sun plays a very important consoling role. Now, we see in this elegy, and that is in fact what these lynch poems are. They are a version of these elegies, except that they are public elegies. They are instances of the poet and the speaker grieving for someone who is lost, and they are grieving not as individuals, but as communities. So in this elegy, there is no such image. There is, in fact, the sun is going down. The sun is not rising, the sun is setting. And as the sun is setting, something else is rising. The dead body, the body which bears the marks of the violence inflicted on it by a racist and abusive American society. So there is no consolation here. In fact, the poet is bringing down the weight of despair on the speaker. The poet is inviting the speaker to experience and stay with and recognize the depths of this despair. So this is how the poem ends. Now, we have covered three lynch poems by Hughes, and I will end with one more lynch poem. This is in some ways the culmination of Hughes's project of thinking through writing and using the form of the elegy and the blues music to produce new and collective forms of grieving. In fact, we have gone really deep into these three elegies. As a result, we have run out of time. So we will continue this in the next lecture and finally conclude our discussion of Hughes in the subsequent lecture. Thank you.